Hey guys, welcome to A Little Bit of Monica. I'm Monica, and today we're going to be doing my November wrap-up. I feel like November was a lot busier than I thought it was going to be, which I probably say about every single month, but despite how busy November became, I am really happy with the number of books I was able to get through. Some of them became favorites, some of them became least favorites, and a lot of middle-of-the-road books for me. I'll give you my rating and maybe like a very brief idea of how I really felt about the book. So let's get started. And let me start by saying that I read so many library books this month that I don't actually have physical copies of a lot of the books on my list. They were either library books or Kindle books, so I don't actually physically have them, but the first book I started with in November, I finished it literally on November 1st, and it was included in my very last Halloween vlog because I finished it kind of within the confines of that event. The first book I technically finished in the month of November was A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. This is a YA fantasy. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was very dark and very interesting. There were some parts that kind of didn't work super well for me, but I think it might just be a preference of the way I interpreted certain things. So I do think this was a really good book, and I had fun reading it despite how dark some of it became. But overall, yeah, I did enjoy this one, and I know there's a lot of really pretty special editions coming out of it, and I'm tempted to get one, but I also am not sure that I liked this book enough to buy it for myself. Even though I would say it's like 3.5 to 4 stars for this one. But moving on to the second book was Curious Tides by Pascal Lascelles. Now this book is also a YA fantasy. This one is about magic that is based on the phases of the moon, and I gave this one 3 stars. I don't think it was bad, but I don't know, there was something about it. It took me forever to get through, and I think the longer a book has me stuck where like I can't say I was excited to pick it up every time. Not that it was boring, but like it just took a long time to get places, and so that ended up kind of making me not enjoy it as much. So I only gave it 3 stars, but I do think it's a very interesting form of magic, and it does take place in a magic school, so that setting is very popular. I felt like the school was kind of ignored a little bit, and that is maybe some of the issue I had. But overall, I do think it is a good book for people who are getting into YA fantasy, who are very interested in the phases of the moon and things like that, because it did have a very fun, school-based, ritualistic, magic-y vibe that was very enjoyable. Just some things didn't work super well for me. The next book I read in November was a reread, and this was a buddy read with Michelle from Michelle's Library, which you'll find that a number of these books are buddy reads, but it is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. We reread Fourth Wing in anticipation of the release of Iron Flame. So I gave this book 5 stars the first time I read it back in mid-May, like right after it came out, and I reread it and it was still 5 stars. Like, I just love it. I love everything about this book. It's been a long time since I've had a book that I could really truly get lost in, and I feel like I can get lost in this book so easily. So I definitely love Fourth Wing, and I was very excited for the highly anticipated release of the sequel, Iron Flame, which came out on November 7th. This book I also buddy read with Michelle, and my husband was reading it a little bit slower than we did, but he was also reading it around the same time as us. This book I also gave 5 stars. I know a lot of people had some very different opinions about the sequel. I gave this 5 stars for vibes alone. Like, I was so invested. I was in the story. And yes, if I think critically, I can find things to complain about. I can find criticisms, maybe some holes here and there, but I'm trying not to think that hard into it because I really had such a good time reading this. And like, again, it's an escape into another world that feels so good to me, and so I had such a good time with this, and I cannot wait for the third one, and I don't even know when it's coming out. But anyway, 2 5-star books in a row. The first one I kind of knew was gonna be 5 stars because I already gave it 5 stars, but I am still glad that I liked the second one just as much as I had hoped I would. Following Iron Flame, I borrowed a copy from my library of The September House by Carissa Orlando. This was the book club pick for the Lights Out book club hosted by Sav from Riveting Reads with co-hosts Kelsey from Slime and Slashers and Katrina from Katrina Brown. They just had their live discussion a couple of days ago and I was able to pop in for a little bit. This book I gave 4 stars. I know this one also had some very different reactions from people. This is a haunted house horror story and I had a really good time with it. My rating was, again, for vibes alone, which I'm trying really hard to be a little bit less critical of some books. And this one was confusing because I was laughing during it. And I was like, is this wrong that I'm laughing? But I don't think it was. I think it was fine. And also there were parts where I was very, like, I felt how intense it was and I was fully invested. Did I love everything about it? Absolutely not. There were characters that were kind of irritating, but there were characters that I thought were fantastic. And I don't know, I just really liked how this went, so I don't have too many harsh criticisms of it. But I am glad I read it, and I was so happy to be able to pop in for the discussion and hear what other people were thinking and see how some people interpreted it completely differently and just did not have a good time, or other people who loved it even more than I did. So that is always fun. The next book I read was at recommendation from Lexi, from Books with Lexi. This was The Stowaway by James Murray and Darren Wehrmouth. This is a mystery thriller story that takes place on a cruise ship where there is a serial killer on the loose and they are trying to figure out who it is and why they are doing this. I had a really good time with this. I gave it 4 stars and I still am like thinking about the one scene. I will never eat soft serve ice cream the same. Like I will never not think of this book when I eat soft serve ice cream or when I use a soft serve machine, which honestly, now that I think about it, isn't that often. I don't know the last time I had soft serve ice cream, which is very sad. But anyway, I had a really good time with this. Again, I thought it was very well written, well parsed out. The characters were interesting, and I was able to follow along with the mystery. I do feel like there were some things that left me a little bit more, I don't know, like I don't want to say upset, but things that I wished had been more fully fleshed out by the end. It's very common for mysteries to give you multiple paths that it could be, and by the end you discover which one is right, but they still kind of explain to you why the other ones were incorrect, and I feel like this one left me a little bit in the dark on that, so I wasn't a super big fan of that element, but pretty much everything else was such a good time. Now, the next one, I don't know if I could consider it my favorite read of the month, but it's certainly close, if not my favorite. It's Check and Mate by Ali Hazelwood. I have the Afterlight exclusive edition, which is absolutely breathtaking, and I am literally obsessed with this book. I'm so glad I purchased this before even reading it because this book was everything. It is Ali Hazelwood's YA romance, which I did not know what to expect. I love Ali Hazelwood's writing. I love all of the books that I have read from her so far. So this is not a surprise that I liked this one, but this is about a rivals to lovers chess whiz story. And I have always been fascinated by chess. Am I good at it? No, not even a little bit. I'm not good. I know how the pieces work. I know how to play a game, and I could play a game to completion. Would I win? Maybe by luck. Honestly, I don't have any sort of like talent or skill at it, but I absolutely am so fascinated by it, and so reading this book felt so good. Being able to read about the intricacies, I just, oh my god. Again, I had a good time with this, but more than a good time, I genuinely was in love with the characters, with the story, the depth of everything, and the chess as well. I love stories about chess, apparently. I fell in love with the show The Queen's Gambit on Netflix. If you haven't watched it, do yourself a favor. It is so good. I actually just finished rewatching it with my husband. We have watched it together at least 2 to 3 times, and I think it came out in 2020. Like, we love it probably a little bit too much, but I love the show. Anya Taylor-Joy, a spectacular job. I think the actors do a fantastic job, but the story itself is so deep, and I don't want to say troubling, but there is a lot of emotion that goes into it. I actually feel like the Queen's Gambit and Check and Mate are a very similar style story, where they both tell a little bit of a love story. This one obviously more so, but it also dives deep into the intricacies of chess and how professional players have to prepare themselves for playing chess. Like, it's absolutely insane. And if you have an inkling that you might potentially care about chess at all, please look into this stuff. I absolutely am so intrigued by all of it altogether. So this was a full 5-star read for me. This was buddy read with Michelle as well. I do have the regular, like, traditional print of the book, and I had it signed by Ellie Hazelwood from the indie bookstore that she works with, and I had it arrive actually the day before the book was officially released, so that was a little fun surprise. But I actually lent it to my sister, who also I think would absolutely love this story. So I haven't heard from her yet. I don't think she's read it, but I'm hoping that she loves it as much as I do. She has not read Ellie Hazelwood, so I am exposing her to this author for the first time. And I know she is intimidated, but it's fine. I'm hoping for the best. The next book I read was another library copy. It was Mrs. Nash's Ashes by Sarah Adler. This book I did not buddy read with Michelle, but I read it at Michelle's recommendation, and it did not let me down. It was a 5-star read. I absolutely loved it. It was a forced proximity romance that pulled on heartstrings. I did not cry, but I felt very emotional while reading it. Like, I could feel the visceral emotion that the characters were experiencing, and I had a fantastic time reading this. If I had to pick 2 books that reminded me of Mrs. Nash's Ashes, it would be a combination of The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros. I just feel like that it is the combination of the 2 of those pretty perfectly, in my opinion, and I loved both of those books. So of course I ended up liking this one as well. It's soft, it's sweet, it's got a few very intense moments, and the relationship that forms is very heartwarming. I really love that book. I know that Sarah Adler has another book coming out in the next couple of months, so I'm very excited for that as well. The next book was a very, very highly anticipated read. It was a buddy read with Michelle. It was Ghost Station by S.A. Barnes. Now, I read Dead Silence in 2022. It was my favorite book of the year, and I was very excited for this new one. It is not a sequel, but written by the same author, and I was just literally over the moon. So I had an arc of it, and I only gave it 3 stars. I did not love the first half of the book. For some reason, the first half really dragged on, and I struggled really hard with grasping what exactly was going on. I discovered about like halfway to 3/4 of the way through, my main issue was I was having trouble visualizing anything. I am a very visual reader. I am imagining scenes in my head, and this book, I had a really, really hard time imagining exactly where they were, what they were doing. And it's a sci-fi horror, so naturally there's going to be things that you don't necessarily know what it's supposed to be or look like because it doesn't really exist, or it's something, you know, they're in space. It is about going to another planet, and so there's naturally going to be things you don't necessarily know how to picture it, but I struggled so hard with it. And I think maybe there was a lot of science, like it was very science heavy in the beginning of explaining a lot of things, and maybe that's what just tripped me up a lot. But the second half of the book I ended up really, really, really enjoying. Where it went, I ended up really liking, and I don't really have any issues with, you know, how the story developed. It's just how it started was a lot of, I don't know, build up that it took too long to get there for me. So I think maybe the book could have been shorter, cutting out some of the explanation of things in the beginning, because without spoiling anything, like I feel like a lot of what we learn doesn't really have a whole lot to do with where we get to in the end. So it just, I don't know. That's a very brief overview of my take of that book. I was very excited for it, and maybe I was too excited, and my hype for this book is what let me down. Maybe I should have had lower expectations, and then I would have liked it more. I don't know. But I do plan on one day rereading this and seeing if my opinion changes, knowing what I know from the first read. It could be one of those books that once you know what's going on, reading it again is a lot more enjoyable. That's not really how books are supposed to be, but I do want to give this another chance at some point. Following the Ghost Station arc, I read another arc that came out on November 28th. This was The Kingdom of Sweets by Erica Johansson. This is a fantasy retelling of the Nutcracker story. I love the Nutcracker, and I was very intrigued by this story. But again, another arc let me down. This was only a 3-star read for me. I did not hate it, but I did not love it. I think I can say that I liked it, but it went in a lot of directions that I was not anticipating, and at times I felt like I was getting whiplash from the different feelings it was giving. Like at one point, you know, it is very fantasy, but it also was trying to be a little bit horror and be mystery and be a little bit thriller and then being a little bit supernatural, and there was just a lot going on, and I feel like maybe it was trying to tackle too many areas of like possible paths for where the story could go, and so I wasn't a huge fan. But like at the beginning and getting everything started, I was fully like engrossed in the story, and I felt like my mind was exploding with some of the things that were happening. And then the further I got into the story, I was like, wait a second, like this is nowhere near where I thought we were going, and it just felt like a different book. Maybe that's the best way to say it, is it felt like I was almost reading like multiple books together, because the story, it was broken into parts, and sometimes the parts didn't feel like they connected as well as I'd hoped. Next up, I listened to the audiobook for Secretly Yours by Tessa Bailey. This was my very first Tessa Bailey introduction, and it was an interesting one to start with. I did give this book 4 stars, but there were moments where I was like, ooh, okay, all right. Michelle did warn me and tell me that I should probably start with a different one of her books, and I didn't listen. I needed an audiobook for a long drive I was going on, and Secretly Yours was available on Libby already, so I just went for it and gave it a shot. It was a second chance, kind of, more of like secret admirer turned crush turned lover. I don't know. It was very weird, but I loved the setting. It takes place in like a vineyard community, and I really enjoyed that. The main character is a gardener slash landscaper, which I love because I work in landscaping as well. And I just feel like a lot of it worked really well for me as individual pieces, and then as they began to work together, I ended up really liking it, and I don't have too many complaints about the story as a whole. It like is not my favorite story by any means, and I just feel like the level of spice that Tessa Bailey writes is not the level that I typically read or would choose to read, but that's a personal preference thing, and I don't have any issues with what she wrote, and I think someone who appreciates a lot of heavy spice would really love it. And it's just, you know, I'm trying not to be too critical in a, like, I can understand why people would like it. It's just not necessarily the type of story that I would typically be picking up. I prefer a little bit dialed down spice, but still a very good story, and I ended up really liking the characters, which is surprising because I do remember being annoyed a little bit by the characters at the beginning, but by the end I ended up really liking them. So I don't have too much to complain about. A 4-star romance read, and it was only audio, which I don't do a lot of books only audio, so I'm glad that I ended up liking this one as much as I did. The next book that I read was another buddy read with Michelle. This was The Marionettes by Katie Weismer. Now this book we got on Kindle, and honestly this book was trending toward a 5-star read for the entirety of the story until the last like 15%, and it felt like I was hit with so many things at once that like I couldn't quite comprehend my own brain. And so I did give this 4 stars. I love the story, I love the setup, I love the world. It's a supernatural romance fantasy, a lot of things going on here, and I had a good time reading it, but again I feel like there were some things that didn't quite connect for me. I do feel like by the end of this book, and it is the first in a series, but I feel like it sets you up at the end where like you have all these issues and all these questions, and by the end of book 1 you have 0 answers. like not a single thing makes sense. Like I don't know, it makes sense, but like you don't actually quite get the full picture for any of the questions that you've had throughout the entire book. It sets everything up for a second book, which is fine, and I can appreciate wanting to get set up for the second book, but I do feel like it didn't resolve anything in book 1 yet, and I feel like I need a little bit of resolution to feel good about everything that happened to the characters. So that was my complaint about that, and it all unfolded, like I said, like the last day of reading it, the last like 10 to 15% just felt like a barrage of like thing after thing happening and nothing resolving itself. So I do plan to keep going in the series at some point, and I'm hoping that it'll kind of even out, and obviously we'll get more answers as we go on, but that's how that ended up at 4 stars instead of the potential there. Man, I was so ready to like give it 5 stars until the end, and I was like, wait, I didn't get any answers. So here's to hoping that the next books in the series are going to answer some of those questions. The last book that I finished, I technically finished it on December 1st, but I read the majority of it in November, so I'm going to talk about it. And that book is Happiness Falls by Angie Kim. This is a mystery thriller about a father who goes missing, and for a lot of the story you don't really know what happens to the father, and it's the family trying to put these pieces together. Now this does take place during COVID, so there's a huge quarantine theme, and I know that a lot of people get bothered by that. I think it was done well. I don't think it was too much. A lot of what happens, there's a character who struggles with verbalizing his thoughts, and so they talk a little bit about how the face masks during COVID make it harder to communicate when you are nonverbal, and I think that that was a very interesting conversation to have. This book is so deep and philosophical, though. I tried reading this just physically and I felt like my brain was melting through my ears. I then got the audiobook and it was so much better. I was able to comprehend things a lot better. It went a lot faster. I was reading this at a snail's pace, trying to like piece together, because it's just a lot of philosophy. I don't know how else to put it. The main character, Mia, just has such a like deep intellectual mind in a lot of different ways, and she explains things a lot in a lot of depth, and I appreciated that, and I think altogether it was done very, very well. I gave this 4 stars. It was a lot though, but I still enjoyed it a lot, and I think people who like a classic mystery thriller would also really enjoy this. And this was a buddy read with Michelle, and I think she also gave it 4 stars, so we were pretty on par with this one, and I don't really have too many complaints. I had a good time. It's not one of those books that I feel like sticks out as a top contender for the year, but the more I think about it, the more I'm like, you know what, some of the depth of this is going to stick with me, and I feel like I could think about this for a while. Like it might just keep coming back into my brain, like, oh yeah, like this part happened. So I don't know, like I feel like I'm going back and forth. I went with 4 stars for now, but like I don't know, something about this book and the depth of it, it might have to like bump itself up to at least like 4.5, maybe 5. I don't know, but for now I'm landing on 4 stars for Happiness Falls. Now there is one more book that I want to mention that I read in November, but it's not on my read list because it was a DNF that I'm still so disappointed in it. This was another NetGalley arc. I did really poorly with arcs this month. Like, they were all just not great, in my opinion. And this one that I DNF'd it at 14%, and I should have DNF'd it much earlier. I love writing really snarky, sassy, honest reviews on NetGalley and or Goodreads whenever I read a book that has me feeling any very strong particular sort of way, and this book had me feeling so many strong emotions and none of them were good. So this was Always the Bridesmaid by Laura Carter, and I'm just very confused because this was book 4 in a series, which I did not read the books before, but it's one of those like the characters all interact but you don't have to read them in order. Well, I read book 4 and I thought it could have been a debut with how it was feeling as far as character setup, character description, writing style. The writing did not work for me at all. I did not like it, but the characters were the worst part possible. When I tell you, I almost DNF'd it at 5% because of one sentence. which if you go and read my Goodreads review, which I will link in the description because I'm very proud of how politely I was able to get across how ridiculous this book was. But anyway, I should have DNF'd it at 5% because there was a sentence that was just so outrageous that I'm like, are you kidding me? This isn't a real book. And then the next paragraph was almost just as ridiculous. And then the page after that, I wanted to throw the book across the room, but it was on my Kindle and I was not willing to break my Kindle for this book. But I was like, no, this is just, it was the introduction to the male main character, and he was a comedian who, in my opinion, there wasn't a funny thing about him. He was offensive, he was mean, I had nothing good to say about him from the beginning. The female main character was not terrible. I don't even know how to describe the female character. She wasn't annoying per se, but like I wasn't a fan of her. I just didn't care about her at all. And then eventually when they end up coming together and like meeting, whew, I simply did not care. Like, he was mean, and then he was like, oh, why is she acting like she doesn't like me? I'm like, maybe it's because you're an asshole. Like, I don't know. Maybe use your brain a little bit. I was so infuriated. It just like kept getting worse and worse, and he kept saying things that were rude and offensive, and I could tell in the way that it was written that it was supposed to be funny, and it wasn't funny at all. Like, I don't understand. This was an epic fail, in my opinion. And it's funny because I was immediately texting Michelle being like, oh my god, I just read this book and I can't believe what's happening. And I was telling her about it. And then she asked me a very interesting question. So we both read through a bunch of Lucy Score books a couple months ago, and we read Maggie Moves On, which we also both DNF'd and absolutely hated, despised the main male character. She asked me who was worse, that character or the one from this one, and I genuinely couldn't have given an answer. Like, I still don't know. I want to say that I've thought about it a couple times. I have not thought about this book. Like, as soon as I put it down and finished my review, I was done with it. It was like out of sight, out of mind. I don't care. But I also like, it was an interesting question of trying to pin these two characters against each other, and I still could not tell you which one I hated more because they were so atrocious. And like both of them behaved so inappropriately that I don't understand why they were written in a way that you are supposed to like them. Like, they're the main male character of a romance, so you're supposed to like them at some point. You're supposed to care about the relationship, and I simply like wanted nothing to do with it. So whew. Anyway, that was super disappointing to read that. However, I felt so good writing that review because it made me feel so many strong emotions, and again, none of them were positive. Literally 14%. That's probably the quickest I've ever DNF'd a book, if I'm being honest. I usually try to give it more of a chance, see if it can get better, but not that one. I simply could not put myself through it. Oh, I also forgot about another one that I DNF'd, which is why I forgot about it, because it wasn't on my like fully read list. But I also tried to read Fireborn by Rosaria Munda. It's actually up on my shelf. I forgot to take it down. I borrowed it from my sister, and Michelle and I were buddy reading it, and we both DNF'd it. I don't have any like specific complaints about it. It was just not for me. It was, I don't know, like too much political drama, too much politics going on, but also like the characters, I didn't care about them at all. They were teenagers, so they felt very young, and a lot of what was said and happening felt very juvenile. But also, like, I simply just didn't care about them at all. And that on top of the fact that it was politic heavy, and I wasn't having it. So we both DNF'd it. I am not opposed to trying it again in the future because I know a lot of people really like it. But for some reason, it was not working for me. Maybe I'm just in a zone right now that, like, that was just too much. So I'm open to trying it again. But unfortunately, that was a DNF. And I'm a little bit sad about it. Now I can give my sister her books back because I did have the first two that I was borrowing from her, and now I can give them back. And I was texting her about it too, and she's like, yeah, if you don't like it at this point, then you should probably stop because you're not gonna like it anymore as it goes. So that one, I forgot about it because I didn't have any super strong emotions. Like, it wasn't something that I hated so horribly that I needed to write a scathing review. It was just like not working for me, and I was finding myself like struggling to get through. So it was more of like a middle of the road type of dislike. So That's why I kind of forgot to even add it on my list. But now that would be 13 complete books plus 2 DNFs for the month of November. And I don't DNF books very often, so like, I'm surprised that there were 2 in 1 month. There were a couple of days where I felt like I was struggling to get through books, and so I was reading a little bit slower, and really like the only book I was reading on a couple of days was the book I was buddy reading with Michelle. I was not reading anything else on the side, which I typically am doing, so I had a little bit of a dry spell there in the middle of the month, I think. Still feels like a very solid month for me, and I'm really excited to be going into December. I have some winter books that I plan to read, and quite a few others that I have coming as library holds that are finally coming in. So I'm really excited to be jumping into the next month. My light is flickering. Sorry, I had to turn my light off because it started flickering, as it does routinely after it's been on for who knows how long. I think there's a ghost in the light, but I have no way to prove it at this point. So now that the light is off, please let me know in the comments if you have read any of these books and what you thought of them. I absolutely love reading other people's opinions, and maybe you enjoyed a book more than I did. I love to hear that because it gives me more hope for the book, that it was just like a personal preference of my own. Or let me know if you read one of these books and you didn't like it as much as I did. I would love to hear. Or on the flip side, if there's any of these books that you haven't read and you are interested, please let me know. I would love to hear about the ones that you plan to add to your TBR. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel so you can keep up with all of my future videos. I am very excited for some of the things I have coming out soon, so be sure to follow along so you don't miss out on any of that. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!